Akateka, Awakateka, Jakalteca-Popti, Ixil, Kichwa, Popoqomchí, Achi. All of these immigrants come through the Sonoran Desert. And we have with us some representations of other creatures, our relatives that are in the Sonoran Desert. And that's why we have them, because the people who arrive here also experience coming through the desert, which is the homeland to the Atum, and to many of the relatives, which are the animals that inhabit this place. Popoqomchí, Achi, Chuj, Ixil, and Kaqchiquel. My name is Blake Gentry. I'm the director of the Indigenous Languages Office at the Elitist Immigrant Shelter in Tucson. I'm a member of the Cherokee Nation. Here in traditional Atum territory in the Sonoran Desert, I've been involved with a project called the Indigenous Anatomy Project, and that project involves immigrants who came through the Elitist Immigrant Shelter between January and August of 2019. And those immigrants were families who had been legally released by U.S. immigration authorities. The project essentially was an attempt at that time to help children in these families so that the children would have something that they could do in the short time that they were in our shelter after a very long journey on which some of them had been fairly traumatized. And as Indigenous peoples come into the shelter, oftentimes they're very reluctant to identify themselves as Indigenous or as Indigenous language speakers. And so when we did this project, it was basically a space in my office which was away from the tumult of this shelter, which had anywhere from 200 to 400 people a night for some parts of 2019. What we did was ask the children if they would have their parent lay down on the ground on a piece of butcher paper, a life-size piece of butcher paper, and then the child would draw the parent, outline the parents, and every single time a child did this, they started laughing because they've never drawn their parent before. And the parents were happy because they sort of relaxed and got into this activity, which was kind of fun. And from there, we then worked with the parents in a unique way. The parents, typically those who are 40 years or older, had never had bilingual education in which they would have learned how to write the language that they're fluent in, but their children had the privilege of having had a year or two of bilingual education in which they were taught how to write. So the children don't know the terms of anatomy for human anatomy, but the parents do, and the children know how to write and the parents don't. So we had them working together in most cases, not all cases, in order to write then the terms in their languages to match the Spanish that we had written as a template. So we did this for 9 languages that were there. Later, a person here who's Atum from this area did one in Atum. That was the 10th one. And eventually we added 7 other languages, and they were all Indigenous languages as well that we had seen come through the shelter, but we didn't have anybody in the occasions they were there to create those posters. One of the amazing things about watching this process unfold was, first of all, the use of language within a family and the learning that was going on between the parents and the child. The parents were not used to seeing the language written. The child was not used to engaging in writing something that their parents said. So these posters, as simple as they are a recorded history of what is not understood in the United States, and that is that Indigenous peoples from Mesoamerica and from South America are undergoing a great migration. We have large amounts of Indigenous peoples coming into this country. According to our statistics from our own shelter, it's at least 20% of those who come through. And we know that between 2017 and 2019, that was over 1,300 families. In addition to the families that come to the shelter, which were 99% of all of our guests, we had individuals often had medical conditions during 2019. And now in 2020 or 2021, During the pandemic, we've had folks show up as well. And recently there was a pregnant woman who's a Kichwa speaker from Ecuador, and she was in the shelter, and I got to talking to her about her language, and she told me that she really liked speaking her language. And when I found out that she knows how to write her language, I asked her if she would help us with yet another language. And so what I did was I gave her a template, which is on this sheet, and this is a template that we actually will use in the manual. And this template for the language anatomy terms is arranged according to how doctors oftentimes do physical exams. So the words are in a particular order by the type of anatomy so that it will be able to be used when it's completed in the manual, as with all the other 16 languages, so that medical personnel would be able to use this in a way which will help them in a medical exam. Since then, what we've done is we had students transfer the terms that were written down of anatomy onto 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, and we're using stick figure diagrams, and we will have these, then we move towards professionally having them edited and translated, and from that we have then been gearing up to create a manual. So the manual will have female and male diagrams in indigenous language in 17 languages, and the explicit purpose for this project is in this phase of it to create what will be a manual with all of these languages in those diagrams, which we will be able to send to clinics in the border region, the Mexico side, on the US side, southern Mexico, and in Guatemala, in order to be able to assist immigrants who may need medical assistance. The translators, we located them in the United States, in Mexico, and in Guatemala. So it's been an international project from our office. A lot of the languages, most of the languages actually, are Mayan languages, and the Mayan languages are mostly from Guatemala in all cases, even though there are also Mayan languages in southern Mexico. And those Mayan languages are languages that have been derived from Proto-Maya, which was the singular source of all those languages 4,000 years ago. So we live in an age in which indigenous languages continue. They're not just dying languages, is what we hear in the media a lot, but they are alive languages that are used by real people, and they're upholding these languages by their use. So those languages are interestingly situated or located in relationship to each other. In Guatemala, for example, most of them are from the Western Highlands. And those Western Highland languages, I'll mention a few of them here, are Akateko, Awakateko, Jakalteca-Popti, two variants of Mam that we have, even though there's 5 variants or 5 dialects of Mam. Ixil, Quiche, Chuj, Kaqchiquel. Those would be the main ones from the Highlands. We have from the lowlands, Kaqchiquel, Popoqomchí. In the eastern Guatemala, we have Achi. And in central Guatemala, we have Ixil and Kaqchiquel. And then from coastal Honduras and Nicaragua and some in Guatemala as well, Belize is Garifuna, which is an Afro-Indigenous language. And those would be the 17 languages that we have. We felt that it was important to address the issue of how languages are perceived and whether or not they're spoken at all in the border region, given what happens with immigrants in the Border Patrol station, in which they explicitly are not spoken to in their language and they're not interviewed in their languages, and then they're released immediately to our shelter. And as a Cherokee, I would say my own understanding of history of Native America and the policies that have suppressed our languages over a long period of time, that stigma is very real, and it's important to overcome, and that the racial prejudice that goes with it is something that we could have a small opportunity to try to do something to set a different example. So this is something that is important for us to point out, that this represents unique indigenous knowledge, and not just with one indigenous nation, but with 17. That's what we hope we will be able to share with the network of shelters and those folks who are engaged in medical aid for indigenous immigrants. Akateka, Awakateka, Jakalteca-Popti, Mam, Ixil, Kichwa, Kaqchiquel, Popoqomchí, Achi, Chuj, Ixil, Kaqchiquel, Garifuna.